Hi, my name is Kees, and I'm a spiritual teacher and life coach. And today I'm having a conversation with Liviu. And I've had some lovely conversations with Liviu before about, I think, our mutual passion of spirituality, non-duality, the depth of reality itself. And Liviu had some beautiful insights. Um, and I'd love to talk a little bit with him and see where it goes, right?
Yeah, let's see where this goes.
Yeah, cool. So maybe can you tell a little bit about yourself and about your journey, how you got to this? Because it was really funny. We met because you sent me a DM to chat. On one of the previous videos I did, the 2 paths to spiritual enlightenment. And yeah, it was really cool connecting with you afterwards. So tell a little bit about yourself.
So, I mean, there's many things I can share, but simply put, I used to be a relationship coach. So I did that for about 5 years, slowly kind of growing my work with guys, with men. So I was helping men become secure and no longer seeking security in their partner.
Yeah.
So basically drop the neediness, drop the codependence, the attachment to the relationship, and approach the relationship from a place of freedom, peace, love, joy, just a healthy approach to relationships. So I did that. And then as I was doing that as my work, about 7 years ago, I began my spiritual journey. Like also by watching a video on YouTube. I found
which video?
Sorry?
Do you know which video it was?
Yeah, it was a spiritual teacher from Norway who teaches in Romania. And he's also been like for many years exploring spirituality. He's like 40 now, 50 maybe, and had his own like dropping of the self and I am that I am and so on, and began teaching. And I saw his video. I was like 23 at the time. So I saw his video and it intrigued me. So I went to his retreat directly, like in the mountains, above the clouds, just a beautiful kind of scenery. And for like 7 days, it was a huge like roller coaster. One day getting it, one day being confused out of my mind, like a lost sheep there, you know.
Yeah.
All these older people kind of 40, 50 around me. And yeah, it was interesting. So that turned my world upside down. And I got some book recommendations from the people at the retreat. Jeff Foster, Adya Shanti, which I was really passionate about Jeff Foster's work for about a year after, and had some like moments of awakening and huge insights because of his book and videos and retreats. So yeah, that became the whole thing. And then Rupert Spira and all those people, right? Eventually came to Tony Parsons' kind of a message. Then went into metaphysics, a lot of that. But a few years ago, got into like the channeled materials, which was quite fascinating. In its own way, of course, with its own limitations. And yeah, about 2 years ago, there's been a series of awakenings and moments of clarity. So about 2 years ago, it's kind of like all the pieces of the puzzle came together into a holistic point of view on reality, on life, that made sense for me. It was very helpful, which was kind of an extension of the coaching I was doing with men already. So helping men become secure in relationship to their woman. And now it's like, how do you become secure in relationship to life? So that's kind of what the journey has been so far.
Beautiful, beautiful. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the awakenings or biggest insights that you had?
Yeah.
If I don't know if you can pinpoint any insight or moment or.
Yeah, there's been a few. I mean, there's been many, of course, insights and kind of little shifts. Of course, we all get excited, like you said at some point, about the bigger ones, right?
Yeah.
We're like, wow. And the way I see all these insights, they're more like dropping away of major pieces of fear,
Yeah.
of insecurity.
Yeah.
Like I described at some point, it's like we're this iceberg of frozen fear or insecurity or ignorance. And every time we have an awakening, we're really just waking up from the dream of fear. So, and a major kind of misunderstanding that is based on fear kind of falls away, and you see life a little bit differently. It's the same life, your eyes are clearer, your perception is less influenced by fear.
Can you give an example of that? Of sort of a fear that you maybe had that dropped away?
Many, but there's 4 in my mind right now, actually.
Yeah.
Which are actually the kind of the main shifts that I would take people through to start kind of correcting their point of view, basically shifting the paradigm from insecure to secure. So the first one that I can share is the judgment of reality, right? So this is life happening, and I kind of shared this a little bit with you when we talked. I was, at the time, 5 years or so ago, I was watching some of these videos from Tony Parsons and Rupert Spira and many others. So I was cutting some potatoes in the kitchen and making some food, and I had this kind of flash of a scene from It's a Wonderful Life, the movie. And in that movie, there's like a scene where people are walking through the city and it's snowing and soon it's Christmas, and they're saying, hey, hi, and kind of chit-chatting and so on. Everybody has their stuff to do, their problems. And it's like I saw that scene without, on mute almost, without any judgment. Not even on mute, but without any commentary, without the judgment of the mind. And without that, it was kind of experientially seen that it's okay. Like whatever is happening in that scene is okay. Like if you just take the judgment of fear away from reality, what is happening is perfect. Not imperfect as in it can't evolve and improve and optimize itself, which it always does, because that's how life is, a continuous unfolding and progress. But it's perfect as it is in this moment.
Yeah.
Because what makes it imperfect is that judgment, which is really just an insecurity. It's an insecure perspective on the moment, on reality.
Because for me, of course, or not of course, but for me it makes a lot of sense. But I think for most people, insecurity and fear is not, or sort of judgment is not per se related to insecurity for people, right? So yeah. How would you meld those together? Because I think that's a beautiful point you've made, but I want to make it more accessible.
Well, that's the thing. That's been my journey, actually, understanding what fear is and the many layers and shades. Like I joked with you, the 50 shades of fear, right?
Yeah.
There's many layers and kinds of fear. Judgment is one of them. For me, fear and insecurity is the same thing. It's not like insecure about your body. It's not feeling safe. It's not feeling threatened by life, feeling vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
That's what insecurity. What insecurity is. So judgment is us seeing this as not okay, as a problem, as a threat.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can be very subtle. I mean, look, insecurity has so many different layers. For example, attachment is fear or insecurity. Judgment, control, pressure, resistance, sacrifice, worry. Like all of these are just variations. Yeah, I call them fear structures.
Yeah.
Okay. That once we point the light of truth at them, like that iceberg, they start melting.
Yeah.
What remains is nothing. It's just this. It's life without the conditioning.
Yeah, I think so. So it's also similar to how I've noticed that my own reality has become, I would say, more secure or more relaxed. First, you're not fighting, right? It's not really, and then you're not thinking about fighting. And then sort of you're thinking, well, I don't need to sort of survive, because that's what it's also about, the fear of death, or the fear of needing to do a thing to keep a certain image or keep a certain usefulness, even all these concepts. And then I think, even when you're not fighting, you're not thinking about fighting, there's still a sort of alertness, sort of which a lot of people that have some sort of trauma, either from this life or past life or collective or whatever, there's a sort of fear that keeps you alert and keeps you sort of not trusting this, right? Or not trusting whatever wants to happen. And that's what I love about the secure concept that you brought to the table. It's a beautiful way to bring understanding to, if you're secure, you don't need to fight or think about fight or not even be alert. You can just be, you can just be here and be okay with that.
Yeah, so you mentioned trauma, and that's what I see trauma as. It's just so it's insecure conclusions that have a visceral basis inside of us because of a visceral experience we have, right? Like an experience that hurt us in some way, and we have created an insecure conclusion based on that event about ourselves, about life, and so on, right? I don't mean to dismiss the idea of trauma and like the work that it requires, but this is how I've come to see it in a simple way. It's just an insecure conclusion on life.
Yeah, I think it's you could almost say it's the result or the scar of trauma, right? Sort of, you have the happening itself, and then usually it leads to a sort of conclusion. Oh, so I can't trust, or even in a deeper layer, the body feels like it can't trust.
Yeah, exactly.
How would you deal with that, or how do you see that, if not for, like, for people that have trauma and maybe have dealt with that in a sort of psychological way, but are now on the spiritual path and are looking at things? How would you see, or how have you dealt with that yourself?
I mean, I think there's many ways to deal with trauma that are very powerful, that other people are specialized in.
Yeah, no, sure.
Not me, more like body work and like all kinds of stuff, from past life regression to even therapy to like psychedelics. And that's just breath techniques, meditation, even yoga. Like there's all kinds of ways to deal with trauma. My way, however, is again recognizing trauma, like almost separating it from the event and just looking at the conclusions we have about life that are fear-based.
Yeah.
And because we all have all these conclusions about life that are fear-based, right? So the idea is, how do we clarify our point of view on life so that most of these conclusions seem nonsensical? So what are the bigger truths and shifts in perspective that we can have? Like, for example, that shift about the okayness of what is. That's a major shift. When one has that, it kind of dissolves a lot of other smaller conclusions or little traumas. So that's how because I'm more of a mental guy, I'm looking for, I'm like a dog with a bone, right? Like looking for clarity, for what's the true point of view on life, what's the accurate perspective on things. And what I found is that the fear-based perspective is always false. And if you're afraid, that's a false perspective. But of course, we want to see that. We have to see that by ourselves, and we have to see it apply to whatever we're afraid of, of.
Yeah.
So
that's I think a beautiful thing which they also talk about in the more metaphysical or channeling teachings. They talk about this a lot, right? That anything which leads to negative emotions is false, and it's sort of your emotional guidance system telling you it is false.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, every fear-based idea, I mean, it's okay to have them. I'm not saying they are bad, because if they arise, they need to be allowed. And that's what that shift was about. Like, it's not just that life is okay. It's whatever is arising, all the emotions, the feelings, the state. Jeff Foster is very good at explaining this, actually. I think he was also one of the catalysts for this shift when I had it. Because just because fear is false doesn't mean it's bad if it does arise. When it does arise, all these negative feelings, not negative, but uncomfortable, unpleasant, it's okay for them to come up, and they will undo themselves. Like I described at some point, that I see it almost like this psychological immunity system, which is really just our observation of what is happening. And kind of to continue the idea of how do you deal with trauma or insecurity or fear that is coming up, I almost kind of, I don't know if I developed it, but that's how it happens for me. I see meditation more as a inner processing. So you just sit down, and for half an hour, 1 hour, what you don't actually have to time it, but because it has its own kind of cycle. And you allow your mind, you allow yourself to freak out.
Yeah. This is lovely advice. Continue. Yeah.
Like, look, it's a safe environment. You're sitting down, and you're allowing your mind to just worry about every freaking thing. And even like exaggerate its biggest fears if it has something kind of impending that it's really afraid of. And by doing that, you're actually processing it out. Your mind is through the doing of it, by allowing your mind to do that, it gets it out of the system. I actually had a big fear about going to prison or something, things like that. Like that was a big fear at some point. And I took that to an extreme, going to prison and all the trouble that may happen there and so on. And I made myself experience, it's not like I made myself, I just allowed myself for the mind to go there, experience, and even exaggerate the pains and the problems and the shame and the guilt and the worst. I just allowed myself to look at that. And then that maybe took 20 minutes or so from like a longer meditation. And after that, I would think back about that scene, and it just, there's no charge to it anymore. There's like, I don't care about it. Like, even if it were to happen, it's sure, let's see what happens,
Yeah.
That's the power of inner processing.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I think I teach a similar method where you sort of combine acceptance with or allowance with compassion, meaning that's the non-doership part of it, right? Which we've talked about before together as well, that you sort of, that something comes up, that you can give it attention, and that you don't have to do anything about it. And what happens is that is kind of the compassionate part. You're allowing it to be however it wants to be. And through that, it loses that charge. It's sort of, it's sort of surrounding tension with relaxation, and it can only start to be relaxed at some point. You know,
Yeah.
it starts to. I can notice in my meditation that sometimes it starts to shake then, and then starts to open up, and especially Rupert Spira has a thing about it that he says facing feelings as awareness, and then he talks about that even though when you do this, oftentimes these feelings or these charge dissipate, they can only usually dissipate if you're okay with them staying.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
that's
because
that's a big part that you say, okay, well, you know, if I would go to prison, yeah, it would happen. You know, it's okay, and then somehow it sort of releases that in a process, of course. But
yeah, these are two different ideas. The idea of like being okay with the worst, which is very important and powerful. But I'm not necessarily talking about that in that example. I'm just talking about like once your mind has processed that fearful image, um, you don't even think about the worst case scenario because
no, yeah,
it's not like, oh, it's okay if it happens. You forget about it. It's gone. You know,
yeah,
because there's no more charge.
yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Go ahead.
So in this sort of, because you're also on because one of your realizations was this non-doership as well, right? So I'm okay with letting life happen, letting this happen, including the mind, the body, and the feelings. And has it happened to you as well as, because this happened to me, that when I was on this journey, or still on this journey, but that I felt that a lot of, like you said before, like a lot of these things come up and they sort of process, but somehow the non-doership or the letting go of, or the being, I say usually from doing to being, but when the being happens, then sort of this floats up and is processed. But it's a very strange feeling because at the beginning it's sort of your being is tested by all these feelings coming up, and you can, if you're not so accustomed to being okay with them, you start to grasp again. How was this for you? Has this happened to you in a similar way, or not so much?
Yeah. So after that shift, the okayness of what is, basically whatever is okay. I think 2 years later or so. Of course, the journey continued. I've been exploring kind of obsessively everything I could find on spirituality, and eventually I found the work of Roger Castillo.
Okay. Yeah.
So he talks about this non-doership kind of thing, right? His teacher was Ramesh Balsekar, who was the student of Nisargadatta, right? So just to understand the credibility factor.
Yeah.
So as I was watching, Roger Castillo is very kind of mental and kind of structured in his thinking, which resonated with me very much. So what I realized after a couple of his videos was that life has always been happening by itself. And if I looked at my past, it was fine. Like life has done all that, and it did it quite okay. It was fine, and it will keep being the same. It will keep living my life by itself without the need of my sense of control, or without the pressure on me to make it happen and control it and so on. So once that hit, I realized that I've never been doing my life. Life has been doing me. Right? And in that realization, because it can sound like a simple realization, but in that realization, like the whole pressure to control life has dropped. It's like, whew, wow. You know, and actually in that period, I was for a few years, actually, I dealt with a lot of anxiety, just out of nowhere, a lot of anxiety, a lot of pressure, again, along the same lines to control life, to take care of the future and so on.
Yeah, everything comes up then.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of one of the sayings, that when the deeper we go, the more comes up,
Yeah.
because we're able to process it. Like we're no longer scared of it. So so yeah, but just because I had that shift doesn't mean that I didn't forget it, right? Or again, like you said, continue to grasp, or at different points in during the day or during my weeks, months, and years. It's just every time you forget it, you're kind of going back to the remaining unawareness that still can have a hold on you. And by doing that, that's actually a good thing. I mean, that's part of the unfolding, the intelligence of life.
Yeah.
You're forgetting so you can remember again by having processed that kind of ignorance that made you forget. Right?
It's a sort of cleansing, and also in a way that if you're, even though there's not something like an ego, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful concept to talk about. But sometimes when you go back to the ego, is how I felt it, that I would go back to efforting or control. Then it would give me such a clear insight in how terrible that felt. It's a sort of such a contraction. And then, after 2 or 3 days of that, I would say, why do I feel so terrible? Yeah, I've been trying to discipline myself in X, Y, and Z or something like that. And I was, of course, yeah.
Yeah. This happens all the time to me. It happened for a long time, and it still happens occasionally, or maybe less than before, which is this idea of material arising, but like insecure material arising to be processed out. But I would often like be sad or like angry or anxious or just unhappy, unfulfilled with life for a few hours, sometimes for a couple of days. And then it's like, it would hit me. It's like, oh, I'm seeking again.
Yeah.
Like that's all it really means. Like it's like, oh, I bought into the seeking again. Of course, that's fine because it was my capacity to do that. So I had to do that. But it's like, that's all that really happened. That's all this uncomfort and negative kind of unpleasant state was all about. It's like seeking from a place of insecurity. Like you're grasping at things and worrying about things again. It's like, I'm back into seeking mode. It's like, oh, so once that hits, which is not that, even that realization when it hits is not random. It's just the end of the processing of whatever was arising, and then boom, it's like the light is switched back on.
Yeah.
Back on. So it's like, okay.
Yeah.
And as this continues, it happens less and less, because this clarity becomes more and more obvious that life is doing this. I'm being done.
Yeah, that's also how I think you can handle more or go more into the depth of your own being, of your own understanding, or some of the fear that might be left, or the bigger pieces of your and the bigger insights of why you're here, and also what shaped you in a bad way, and also what shaped you in a good way, because usually they're also related. Is if you have if you have an idea, this is what I felt, that if I need to clear up trauma, or if I need to work on myself, then it's very heavy. It's a very heavy burden to carry. And when you know that it's not you that need to do anything, but it's just life doing itself, and you trust the process, then you again come back to this sort of allowance with compassion. It's a sort of automatically it wants to be solved, because that's why it arrived in the first place, which I think is what happens to regular people all the time, that fear comes up, or limitation comes up, but we just push it back, or even distort ourselves further by thinking we need to do X, Y, and Z, or we need to have rules, discipline, blah blah blah. It's sort of distortion on distortion, instead of letting go of that distortion by bringing compassion and love to it, in a way.
Yeah, this can actually tie into something that I think we should discuss, this idea of the three paradigms.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because right now you kind of mentioned that some people, fear comes up, they believe it, and they act from it. So they take action in order to avoid whatever they're afraid of. So that's the first paradigm where it's like we don't trust life, and like life seems like this dangerous random experience that we have to do what we can to survive. That's the first paradigm, kind of survival. Then you have the second paradigm of like success and whole development, psychology, and all that. Even metaphysics can fall into this.
Yeah.
But this is where the fear that in the first paradigm used to kind of push us toward, so we try to avoid what we're afraid. Here in the second paradigm, fear turns into desire. So it becomes the driving force, it becomes the empowering mechanism. We don't realize it because we feel empowered. We're like, oh, I want that, I want that, I want this, that, and the other, right? So, because desires, in the way that I'm explaining them now,
yeah,
or at least what I mean by them in this case, is fear turned into fuel, if you want. It's our need to seek security happening.
Yeah.
So this second paradigm is very much driven by desire and fulfilling goals and like using ambition, discipline, willpower. So I call this the paradigm of success. You call it conscious doing, I think.
Yeah.
And for me, this paradigm is all about striving, right? So if the first one is about sacrifice, the second one is about, so to survive you sacrifice, here to succeed you strive. Right? And eventually we kind of begin to burn out and to be dissatisfied. Even if we achieve certain goals, we realize that what was driving the seeking of those goals has not gone away, which is the insecurity. It's like we have the goal, but we're the same insecure person, you know? So these first two paradigms, they are insecure paradigms. They are still in the insecure being category. So then we eventually kind of start, so we burn out here, we're dissatisfied, even if we do achieve results. But overall, this whole empowerment paradigm is not wrong, it's just limited. And I've been through this for a long time as well. When I was trying to grow my coaching business and learning about personal development, like the whole problem, the biggest problem with it is that it still assumes that it's on me to make my life happen. And so there's a lot of pressure and stress to control my reality. Like if you look on YouTube, on all these videos about personal development, all these podcasts, which are interesting, I like them, but they have this assumption in the back that you need to control your reality, and here's the strategies to do it. And that's, maybe it's not yet experienced as suffering, because we're still kind of empowered, we're still kind of driven by those desires, but eventually we realize that this pressure on me to make my life happen is experienced as suffering. So we're beginning to move into spiritual teachings.
Yeah.
Which is the third paradigm of, we can talk more about that if you want. And that includes the non-doership and the non-duality. And because that's where we realize that's really about surrender. So you have survival, success, surrender. And simply put, it's like I don't trust life, first paradigm. I trust myself, second paradigm.
Yeah.
That's like, and then the third one is I trust life. I realize that I can trust life so much that I can actually follow my heart and joy. But I began this with the idea that in the first paradigm, we're running away from fear. So we're sacrificing either ourselves or others. In the second paradigm, fear is driving us to desire. But in the third paradigm, we're no longer believing fear because we realize the falseness of it. We begin to realize the falseness of it. And we're just able to sit with it and let it arise. So sometimes I say it as, let fear move in you, not move you.
Yeah.
So once fear moves in you, it's fine. But then when it comes to action, that's like natural action, non-doing, joy, ease, intuition, just being moved by life, right? And your truth, your heart, and so on.
Yeah. How like what came to mind is also the idea like of suffering that the Buddha teached, you know, the Four Noble Truths, related to, in a way, where I think a very misunderstood teaching is that desire leads to suffering. But I think you just illustrated that as well, that in the first paradigm, it's sort of, I don't want bad things to happen to me in the future, which is a desire in a way, but it's also a struggle. It's then a fight because you can't control the future, and you sort of need to try to fight it already to make sure it doesn't happen and things like that. You know, and then in the second paradigm, you're saying, but I want good things to happen to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And sort of you're fighting to try to make sure that in the future good things happen to you, and you're sort of disciplined and things like that. And both are, you know, different ways of control where you're still not here. You know, you're still not allowing this to be what it is, because knowing also from a place that even though you can't control it, or can only in a limited way control it, sort of it does not help you to control it, because you don't know what's good for you in the first place. You know, you don't know. All this shit can be very good if you look at it from a soul's perspective, or look at it from the lessons you'll learn from it. And that's also, I think, an insight which happened to me through understanding some of my past, and in a deeper way, and knowing, basically going into my own limitations and fears and things like that, and understanding the why they are there. So that's the good reason, you know, they serve the purpose, and also the bad reason, that they hurt me in a way, and they're both there. It's interesting. And then you know that all these sufferings, which seemingly suffering, but were very useful, that all suffering is useful in a way, if you know how to use it or look at it from a right perspective.
Yeah. If you understand the meaning of it, you realize that it's useful. So, for example, I think Rumi said it, or as the Sufi mystic, right? He said that life or love wants to do us a favor sometimes, so it turns us upside down and kind of shakes the bullshit out of us.
Yeah.
Or the nonsense. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, of course.
Yeah.
But and that's actually another shift that I had a few years ago, about this understanding the value of suffering. And when I had that shift, I ended up collecting a whole series of quotes like that kind of point to this idea that, like Gibran says, that suffering is the medicine through which life heals you, basically. I mean, there's all kinds of quotes that are really good at the point from mystics and sages, pointing at that when you're suffering, life has not gone wrong. It's actually getting right. It's in the process of getting right.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about the third paradigm for you, and how people get there, or in your perspective?
Sure. So the third paradigm, we could call it the spiritual paradigm, but I really mean the non-dual spiritual paradigm. Because in a way, it's like you have the first paradigm of like sacrifice and survival, have the second one of personal development, success, and so on, entrepreneurship and all that. and then you get into the spiritual kind of paradigm. But there you can almost divide it into three as well. You have the religious, the metaphysical, and the non-dual. And even these three, you can actually overlay them on the other two. It's like the first paradigm has a lot of affinity with the religious spirituality. It's very much based on dogma and this relationship with God based on fear, and just follow the rules, and avoid doing that, don't do that, and so on. We're trying to kind of simulate spirituality by trying to force ourselves to do the right actions, rather than, like the third paradigm, understand why it makes no sense to do the wrong actions. It just makes, like, you end up agreeing with spirituality with religion in many cases, just from your own awareness. Anyway, so then
I think that's a really important point, because I've seen this so much that looking back at religion, you can think, well, this is just a misperception of a very good teaching which happened here. It's just a, and I don't even see I don't even see sometimes the teaching, but I just see that I can understand that it's good to do that. Like, don't do harm to animals, like in the Buddhist type of way, things like that. But there are many of these type of teachings where I think, oh, it makes sense, and I can understand why Buddha maybe would do that, but don't copy what Buddha thinks is good. But sorry.
Yeah, I mean, Keith, this is for different people at different levels of awareness. Different things resonate.
Yeah.
You see, when I say that the first paradigm is not just an idea, that's a whole worldview. That's how you understand life. That's usually my parents or the generation of our parents that have lived through like poverty and problems and like life being hard. And that's the paradigm, that's the whole perspective, that life is hard and you have to do what you can to survive.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, it's very insecure, still fear-based. So religion has this kind of healing mechanism of I'm trying to be good and I trust God to help me here. Then when you get to the empowerment kind of paradigm of like personal development, the metaphysical type of spirituality tends to resonate a lot with people at this kind of worldview where I trust myself, I can make everything happen, I can build the life of my dreams.
Yeah, you are the creator.
Yeah, and again, it's not wrong, it's just limited, and we know it's limited because it eventually begins to hurt, and you're starting to look for the next answer, like the more accurate perspective. So it's kind of like you have the dogma of religion, you have the details of metaphysics, and then you have the depth of non-duality. And that's what I really mean. The non-dual perspective is where you realize that life is doing this. And again, like we said, I am being done, and not just life. Like, I'm not separate from life. I mean, I'm an expression of life, almost like a function within consciousness. Even like the self, the person is a function, is a way that life is expressing as me. Wow, great. So it takes the pressure from the self, it puts it, kind of like I said, it outsources it to source. And not only are we not separate from life, but what we're not separate from is a very intelligent, creative force, if you want, right? So that's where like insecurity falls away, because begins to fall away or falls away completely, because it makes no sense to be afraid of the loving, intelligent nature that you are already. Yeah. So that's what I mean, that the third paradigm is when we start realizing like all that. But just to mention something about religion, like religion gets a bad rap because what we usually see about religions is just the surface dogma, the rules we need to follow. Again, that's good for a certain level of development. I feel like religions have the whole depth. You can go true religion, like the true meaning of religion is religare, which in Italian means, in Latin means reunion, to reunite with the divine, right? To reunite with your nature. So if at the surface of religion there's dogma, when you go deeper, you find the details, which is kind of like all the theology, which is kind of metaphysics. But then you go even deeper and you get to the mystics of all religions. And the mystics have seen the non-duality. They've seen that, I think, again, Rumi says it, that when I look for God, I find myself. When I look for myself, I find God, you know? So, and that's the Sufi, that's like, for example, the Sufism is the deeper aspect of religion in the Muslim religion, right?
I also love it when they say inshallah, you know, if God wants it. So everything is inshallah. And that's, in a way, it's beautiful, but it's still from a sort of point of duality that God is somewhere else, not me, you know, or not everything, but it's just there is God. But I do really like that surrender aspect, which I think can lead to some breakthroughs for people. If they really think that God is doing everything and I can just chill, that's almost non-doership.
Right, but you see, the first person who said that, let's just say, who kind of came up with that, was a mystic.
Yeah, sure.
So he said it as a truth. It's just that it's heard by people who are still at maybe the first paradigm level, and they're like, inshallah, like, okay, it feels like a good relief, you know, of fear sometimes.
Yeah.
But the mystics, when they say this thing, they don't kind of say it as a metaphor. It's like, inshallah, as God, like Jesus said, thy will be done, not mine, you know?
Yeah. Or the kingdom of God is within us, you know? It's a very interesting...
But to continue, it's like, so you have the Islamic religion, which is the Sufi kind of movement or word, or however it's called, I don't know, is the deeper, the non-dual side of it. Then you have, for example, Buddhism, which is Zen, is the deeper side of it. Then you have the Hinduism, which you have the Advaita kind of Vedanta. That's the deeper side. So it's almost like religion. You take the elevator from the first floor to the second floor, the theology, and then you get to non-duality.
Exactly, yeah. I think also that, just like you said, it's just when you go from a deeper, look at things from a deeper level yourself, you want to help. And at some point you think, well, let's just put on 3 different classes here, right? And make sure that everybody's helped in a way. And then the classes are these different teachings or elevators you just described.
It's just a matter of depth. Like, how deep do you go? They're not separate.
No.
I feel like just for everyone, like for each its own, as they say, right? If we're busy living our life running from fear, we're going to follow the 10 commandments. We're going to try to follow the 10 commandments. If we're kind of more progressive and so on, more empowered, maybe we'll look into, and especially with a spiritual bent, we'll look into the theology of it. But then if we're ready for it, we'll go like straight to the non-dual thing.
A funny thing, what I like is that I think Nisargadatta said something like, if you're a monk or if you're learning on the path, then you need to be a vegetarian and this and this and this and this and this and that. But he said, if you're a yana, you know, basically if you've understood this non-duality, then you don't have to do anything. Because then the whole efforting thing is dropped away and you'll automatically do whatever life wants to do. And then if you're doing something forced, then let's keep it or if you're efforting, then let's keep it at good things to effort in, you know? And I think that's a funny paradigm.
Paradox, yeah.
Understandably so.
Yeah, the way I see this is that it's like the soul, you know, is on a journey to figure out who it is, like who am I, and how does life work? How does this work? So these three paradigms are just a snapshot, like a model, a conceptual model, if you want, for people being at different levels of understanding how life works. And the first paradigm is less accurate. The second paradigm is more accurate. The third one is actually accurate. And you can even go beyond that, and you go into like no mind, no concepts, drop all that, just be this, now, presence, that's it. But this is so it's a movement. What I'm trying to say, Kees, is that the truths of the third paradigm, if you will, are already true always.
Yeah.
The intelligence, the harmony, the non-separation, the non-doership, the okayness, all of them are true always. It's just that because we don't know, we're functioning on a limited level of awareness in this kind of, and we're suffering the corresponding pain of it.
Yeah, definitely. And so once people cross this threshold of surrender or non-doership in this third paradigm, I think last time. So what tends to happen from your perspective? Let's say this surrendering or this non-doership or this, is allowed. This is okay, and you don't. I think a dropping of effort, because that's how I noticed it in myself, happens. What is your personal point of view of what life then wants to steer you in, or in a way? What can sort of, from a personal perspective, which is of course a strange perspective because there's no person, but from that form perspective, what happens with this sort of body, these actions, these feelings, this mind?
Yeah, I mean, it's like life being a person. It's life personing, right? So just because there's no actual separate person doesn't mean there's not the appearance and the experience of life being lived as this apparent individual expression, which I think is the whole point of life, is to manifest joyfully and creatively through this expression of form, which we call a person. But like I said in a conversation, I mean, that's how I see it. Even the French word person means nothing. It's person, right? If you translate it, it's like it means nothing. So nobody here.
Yeah.
But like the only problem with being a person is when you think you're separate from life. So then kind of the way you steer the conversation is very beautiful, because it leads through all four shifts, if you will. It's like the first one, it has to do with seeing the okayness of life. The second one has to do with the dropping of control and the realization of non-doership. The third one has to do with changing our view of suffering, which we discussed briefly, right? That it's actually the process of healing, emotional, physical, and so on. That's like what suffering is, and even external. And then the fourth one has to do with the answer to your question, that the way life happens from a secure perspective, from a non-dual perspective, if you will, or at one perspective, is that it wants to manifest harmoniously through this individual, through this form, through you and me and so on, right? So it wants to manifest harmoniously through the person. And the best way to do that is, the most intelligent way to do that from life's perspective, we could say, is to manifest through a person's pleasure or joy, or through your heart, through your natural functioning, not through like, so here the distinction begins to come up, and my shift at the time between force and flow, between fear trying to move you and joy. So fear usually has to do with getting stuff, because it's insecurity trying to find security. Joy has to do with doing what feels like doing in the moment to moment in your life. So life begins to flow naturally through your joy. That's how I call it, through your inspiration, through your excitement, and so on.
Have you had any trouble with that? That's a question I get sometimes.
It depends what you see as trouble.
Sort of outside trouble. People thinking, "Come on, Liviu, what you're doing here." Not that that matters so much, but
can misunderstand this as selfishness, or which is really not the case. It's just self-honoring within the context of life. But it can lead to trouble even in our life, but the kind of trouble that really mean the recognition of where we're living in misalignment. So that comes up. So for example, I had to divorce my lovely wife. Trouble, if you will, right?
Yeah.
So I was in a relationship for about 10 years, married 2 years, one and a half. And after like 1.5 years, I started kind of having some doubts about, and it's just a beautiful relationship with a beautiful woman, beautiful soul. We're still friends now. It's like 2 years later after our divorce. And I started having these doubts because it no longer felt like it's aligned to be in this relationship. Like I didn't feel like I was appreciating the marriage as it should be appreciated. And I felt like I needed my space to like align with my joy completely and just go into spiritual exploration and just by myself, not being pulled in any direction by anybody, right? So if that's what you call trouble, it led to that. But and many people, of course, in the other paradigms, they can see a divorce as a problem. And even as a love coach that I was up until that point, can be like, well, you're a love coach, then you're divorcing. Like, what is that? Like, that's a failure. That's not the point. The point is that's actually a success in terms of having, like, you can't realize how much courage I needed to honor my truth. And not, it's easy to have courage, or easier when it's a bad relationship. But when it's a beautiful relationship that you're almost like reading each other's thoughts and like you're flowing on a similar wave, but still doesn't feel aligned. It's like, what the fuck? Like, what's going on? But for like half a year, those doubts kept coming up. So I had to eventually honor and say, okay, let's split up. If we're meant to be together again, we will. So yeah.
I think, yeah, that's thank you for sharing that. I think personally, I've noticed that all of life, everything is cyclical. Everything is moving in these cycles, and it's not that a cycle that lasts a year or a cycle that lasts 50 years or 1 second is better. It's not that sort of time, a certain amount of time is better or something like that. So you can probably look back on actually a good marriage until you had that doubt, and even a good relationship, which you honor, which is, something which is lovely. And until sort of the cycle is done, and sometimes we don't even know why the cycle is done. Why do people want to, leave their job, or even leave their partner, or go to a monastery, or all these strange things that people might do. But sometimes it's just a cycle. Why do you want to go to the supermarket to get a certain type of roll which you have in mind, or something like that? I have no clue why that comes up, and it's okay to just get it.
Yeah, this brings up a lot of ideas. So the way I see it is that cycle is driven by our joy. You could say our passion for something.
Yeah.
You could say our interest for something. And my joy was in that relationship for 10 years. And then eventually it kind of stopped being my joy to be in it.
Yeah.
So my joy basically is life's intelligence communicated through what I feel, right? So the way I see joy is actually is the most accelerated path of evolution, because you're not distracted by fear. It's like you have a highway, you follow your joy, you're going on the highway. If you're following fear, that's fine. It's your part of your journey. It's your capacity. You should be doing that. You're just going out off the highway and kind of getting lost a little bit, learning the lesson, getting back to the highway, back to your heart, back to the soul, back to your truth. Life is so harmonious that it's fine to get off because we need to learn, because that's our capacity. But if we begin seeing the intelligence of our joy and our feelings and kind of follow that, because we're secure enough to do it and clear enough to do it, then we go through these cycles and we honor them without overstaying, you could say. And you could say that a relationship and a marriage, for example, or even a job, but focusing on relationships here, that cycle could be a whole lifetime for some people, So it's their love and joy and passion to be together for a whole lifetime. And the problem is that if that becomes the standard, that's just a consequence of people honoring their truth.
Yeah.
In their case. But in other cases, we need to have shorter relationships according to our joy that lead to certain kind of leaps in our progress.
You can't predict that. That's the whole thing. If you have the desire, right, for a lifelong being together, and you're really holding on to then that can lead to sadness. That's the whole idea of the suffering, this grasping suffering metaphor. And of course, we're talking about excessive suffering because it's very normal to, feel sort of grief at the end of the relationship, which is very natural. But then there can also arise a sort of meta frustration, which either wants to happen to clear things up or is still there because there is a lot of unnecessary commitment or craving still left.
And if it's still left, then that's the process of your healing, having to experience that. And of course, it helps if you're kind of ready and able to seek guidance through books, therapy, coaches, and so on, spiritual guidance.
Yeah.
Because all the guidance does is help you come to the same conclusions that you would eventually come on your own through your own suffering. So it's like you can evolve in life in this way. It's like through your own experience and suffering, through other people's experience and therefore insight. Like we eventually arrive at truth anyway.
Yeah.
And I feel like even the ability to seek for guidance or like read books or explore different fields, even spirituality, comes at a certain point in someone's evolution as a soul where they can recognize the value of other people's experience.
Yeah.
Not just their own.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a beautiful, beautiful ending to our conversation.
Already, we're ending it? What's the time?
An hour and a half. But maybe we could
be 3 hours. Man.
What? Yeah, we could do more.
It should be 3 hours.
I know. Well, maybe let's do a part 2 sometime. That would be cool.
Sure, we talked about cycles. Well, even these conversations, they have their cycle.
Yeah.
And in my experience, this is not the end. But of course, we can honor
to me,
you feel as well.
Well, this is not the end, people. You've heard from it. I'll leave the links from Liviu below, and we'll do it part 2 because this is not the end. Okay, see you. Bye bye.